there's certain provisions in the lease that you have to be mindful of because they kind of counteract with each other. If you're going to give on one, you might have to give something away on another. One of the things that I see constantly is that they don't have a limitation or a condition on the exclusive use, particularly pertaining to so long as the use is still in existence.
This episode brought to you by Suites at Madison. Meeting and conference rooms for rent by the hour, week, month, or year. Suites at Madison, where business gets done. Check them out at www.downtowntampaoffice.com. Now, on to the show.
You are listening to the Invest Florida Real Estate Show, covering topics in lending, buy and sell strategies, property management, hot markets, and tips and tools to guide you along the way on your path to real estate success. You want Florida investment real estate talk? You have come to the right place. And now, our hosts, Eric Odom and Steven Silverman.
This is Lawfare. We have back with us again today Rob Gidel. Rob Gidel is an attorney based in Tampa whose concentration is on complex real estate and he's in all fields of real estate. Rob's been on the show before and we're happy to have him back. Rob, welcome to the Invest Florida show, and maybe you just want to start off with your standard disclaimer, and maybe you should add, don't take alcohol at the end of it.
Thank you, Stephen. Great to be back. Speaking as a Florida lawyer, general terms here, every situation is unique. The facts and circumstances, always seek the expertise of a licensed attorney on these issues, notwithstanding the comments I'm about to make.
Rob, I won't say anything about the Florida bar. I think that's great that you're doing your disclaimers there as you're supposed to. But we appreciate you always being available for us to talk lawfare, talk about issues that are happening in our market that investors can use to hopefully save their rear ends if the situation comes their way. Today, you're going to talk about retail and one of the common clauses that you see inside of a retail lease. If you're a retail tenant, you're considering buying a retail plaza. Tell us about that, Rob.
Sure. So with regard to exclusive uses, there's certain provisions in the lease that you have to be mindful of because they kind of counteract with each other. If you're going to give on one, you might have to give something away on another. And it's really important to understand how both provisions interact with each other before you give something to a tenant.
Talk about exclusivity.
Yeah.
So exclusivity is a term that a retail tenant would typically ask for. Why?
So they're looking for language which would require the landlord either to obtain the tenant's consent in the event that they're looking to bring in a competing tenant, or it's just a blanket restriction, basically saying the landlord, let's say, for example, we're a pet store. The landlord can't lease any part of the shopping center to a pet store.
The tenant wants that because they don't want the competition.
Correct.
Right. And it really makes sense for everybody because nobody wants 3 pet stores. It doesn't really help anybody. So
yeah, that center would go to the dogs.
It's been so long since we've been not been exposed to Stephen's puns, but tonight we got one laid on us. Thank you, Stephen. You know, there's a reason why you would have both the landlord and the tenant would want to have these exclusive uses, but they're not always clean.
Right. And I would also add that a lot of times tenants want, hey, we've created the exposure. Everyone comes to the center for this pet store, or for the specific use to come to the market that we've created. We want to basically protect that. So one of the interesting things that I think gets overlooked a lot of times from a landlord's perspective is at what point does this restriction die? One of the things that I see constantly is that they don't have a limitation or a condition on the exclusive use, particularly pertaining to so long as the use is still in existence. So let's say that pet store, the hypothetical pet store that we're talking about, decides to assign its lease to a new user. Technically speaking, since that lease,
beauty shop,
a huge beauty shop, correct. If you don't have that condition that so long as the pet use is in operation, then your pet store restriction will still be on your center. So it's pertinent for you to make sure that the language in the lease has a condition that the use still needs to be in use and operation. So if they assign it to another pet store, I think we can all agree the landlord will be fine with that. But if it gets to assign to a use, and again, we're hypothetically assuming that the lease allows them to assign it to a different use, but in the event they did, the existing restriction needs to extinguish. to be no more.
And, I've seen that, like a center on a very busy road in East Tampa, and there was an exclusive use clause in there, and it's just sitting vacant. The landlord can't rent it. It's just, to me, it's always tragic when you go past and see that.
Absolutely. And you can see these situations where, again, like we've talked about in prior segments, talking about the continuous operation clause. Sometimes tenants will just go dark. And if they go dark, or they vacate the premises, so long as they're paying rent, that exclusive will still stay on there. So that's why it's important to have it to be connected to the operation. So long as they are open and operating, consistent with that use, they should be granted that exclusive. But if they are not, they should not be able to have it.
So let's see how we'd word it. You'd word it saying something to the effect that is, if the tenant is continually operating, the exclusive use shall stay in effect. And if the tenant leaves, then it no longer applies. And that's in the lease. And it's just a small thing to put in that protects the landlord.
Correct. It prevents from having empty boxes that you can't fill because you've got a restriction, or it prevents you from leasing another space in your center to a tenant that has that use while they are not operating the use.
I'll give you an extreme example that I was exposed to: a drugstore. And of course, you had consolidation of all of these drugstores, and some of them went dark because they were across the street from each other and they were competitors. They did it on purpose. And then when there's consolidation, there's no point in having the same brand across the street from each other. But there's exclusive uses inside because it was hair products, vitamins, convenient foods, blah, blah, blah. There's a whole list of things inside the exclusive use clause. And right next door was a Blockbuster. When Blockbuster went down, now the drugstore was still paying for the lease. Okay. But they went dark. They were trying to find a user to take over that lease. But when the Blockbuster next door to it, which was part of the center, went dark too, they, meaning the drugstore company Ixnay, did not allow any dollar stores, any beauty shops, anything that would have sold those types of products that were sold in the drugstore at the Blockbuster. So not only did the guy have a dark drugstore, which was, at least he's getting rent paid on, but that Blockbuster store was a pretty sizable entity. He was being handcuffed by everything that was going on in the Blockbuster, that he tried to lease to the Blockbuster, made it very, very difficult. So these are the types of things, you got to take them seriously. I think that's your point.
And as we're sitting talking, and I'm thinking of clients that I have. I mean, they pay one time an attorney, they do a template lease. And every lease they do in the centers is exactly the same thing.
Yeah, but you know as well as I do that CVS or the drugstore is not going to sign that.
No, sure, but I'm not even talking about the drugstore. I'm just talking about standard kind of leases. And so when you're dealing with tenants with different kind of uses and things, it's really easy to overlook these things. And
it can be a profit center. Or a financial mechanism for the tenant too. They're putting that in there for a reason. And oftentimes, landlords have to come back to them and say, hey, I've got this tenant. And the response is, well, how much does it mean it? Buy me out. Right. Exactly. So it's a protection, and, you can see why, from the tenant's perspective, why they would want to do that.
Good stuff, Rob. So just to summarize, exclusive uses can be very good for the tenant and for the landlord, but be careful of the language, whether you're writing the lease yourself and you're placing that tenant in there, or you're buying an existing center, that you don't get into hot water on the exclusive uses.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Rob. See you on the next Lawfare.
Thanks for having me.
You've just listened to the Invest Florida podcast with Eric Odom and Steven Silverman. Join us every week for actionable real estate investment ideas, and of course, visit our website at www.investfloridashow.com for more shows and tips on how to earn a cash flow in the real estate market in Florida. While hosts and producers of the Invest Florida show have no reason to doubt the validity of comments of our guests, we do not warranty their accuracy. Please check with your legal, financial, and tax advisors before entering into any investment. Returns will vary from person to person and deal to deal based on unique circumstances. All information expressed in this show is for educational purposes only. Opinions of the guests are not necessarily shared by the hosts and producers of the Invest Florida show.